What's up, friends? Welcome to SPDM TV. My name is Mike, part of the SPDM crew, and I watch a lot of TV. We talk about various TV topics, reviews, and general appreciation of TV, past and new. You can follow me on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Serialized at MLHilty2452 to see what all I'm watching. This week, we will be talking about Creature Commandos, the official start of James Gunn's DCU, and I'm joined by one of the hosts of the Movie Smash podcast, Chris Roberts. Chris, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Great. Thanks for having me here.
I greatly appreciate you reaching out and looking to collaborate on a couple of our crew podcasts and looking forward to chatting with you more on various topics. But before we get into a little bit about Creature Commandos, tell me a little bit about yourself and tell me a little bit more about Movie Smash.
Sure. And once again, thanks for having the show. I am glad I have someone to talk to about the show. I really want to discuss it because on my show, we really talk movies,
Mhm.
not really TV shows. So I love the opportunity to discuss this because this show has been fantastic, which we'll get into. I'll save that conversation. But as you mentioned, my name is Chris Roberts. I'm the founder of Off Panel Creations. And I'm from the show Movie Smash with two other co hosts where we discuss comic book movies or movies that are based on comic books or graphic novels outside the MCU. We do that just because a lot of people are already talking about those movies, those Marvel movies that are coming out. We'll talk about them occasionally, but we like to review movies that go back to the 60s. We look at movies that have been around for a while. We look at movies that are zombies, vampires, superheroes, what have you. It doesn't really matter so much as long as the original source material was a comic book or a graphic novel.
So those episodes I've gotten a chance to listen to have been really great. You have recommended specifically to me and some of the people within our crew to listen to start with the Atomic Blonde episode and get a feel for the show. Definitely recommend that. Everybody out there, subscribe to the show. It's really great, and just looking forward to future collaborations with you moving forward. So, as mentioned before, we're going to talk about Creature Commandos, and what we're going to do is that we're going to talk about a little bit about where we think DC is in terms of their past life as a DCEU. We'll talk a little bit about the direction that the DCU is going in. We'll talk about what our history looks like with Creature Commandos, which, judging by how a lot of people are reacting to this, there's not a whole lot of familiarity out there if you're just like a very basic comic book fan. And then we'll get into Creature Commandos itself and what the future holds for the DCU. But let's start with the DCEU. The body is sort of cold at this point with what Aquaman the Lost Kingdom was, or no, it was, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Aquaman the Lost
I think
Kingdom
so.
was the last official entry in the DCEU, the Snyderverse, whatever you want to call it. So let's start there. How are you feeling about the DCEU and just DC Studios before James Gunn was announced to be the shepherd moving forward?
Yeah, so I'm a huge DC fan. I know this is an audio podcast, but I know you can see behind me on the wall some Batman memorabilia. I've always been a big Batman fan, not necessarily from the comics, but from the animated series. So I've always been rooting for DC to do well. The problem is DC has sort of been bipolar in their movies. What I mean by that is their animated movies that were coming out in the past 20 years have been fantastic. If you have not watched them, I'd recommend go see them. And
Absolutely.
yet again, for those who this is an audio, so you can't see this, but on the wall behind me, I have a shelf just full of every DC animated movie that's ever been produced. Their movies, on their hand, suffered from some serious problems coming up to this point. They were always trying to be sort of more grounded superheroes than Marvel because they sort of jumped. Marvel was doing very well; they're very successful in that. And they were coming out saying, "Hey, we want that too." And the problem they came out and say, "Okay, they took the wrong lessons from the Marvel movies initially coming out. They, we're going to be dark, gritty. We're going to be more realistic. It's God's attempting to be in the mortal world essentially, and that's really where they started suffering before James Gunn took over. And then you had problems where essentially, how do I put this? That they never actually found their voice because you had Snyder coming out with Man of Steel. You had these movies that sort of trying to feel like grounded, but then all of a sudden the studio came in and said, "Be more like Marvel," which
Yeah.
means they tried to be more like Marvel, and then that didn't work. So it's like we're gonna go back to being gritty again. That didn't work. So now we're gonna be trying to be funny again, and just because they never found that solid single voice to
Mhm.
drive them, that it just and they, after they fired Snyder, it just didn't work out that well.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. And I think what you said that kind of resonated the most with me is I was really rooting for DC to do well because I love the Batman movies. You say what you will about movies like Batman Forever and even those who say like The Dark Knight Rises and Batman Begins doesn't reach the heights of The Dark Knight, I'm somebody who I kind of like Batman Begins a little bit more than others. And I think Batman Forever is a little overhated, if I'm being my personal opinion.
Yeah.
But I love a lot of the DC characters. I think that there is something that I was just rooting for them to be successful. And that singular voice, I think, was definitely missing. And I think Zack Snyder is a talented filmmaker for some of the things that he can do. And I think maybe this project got a little bit away from him, just a little bit.
Mhm.
But I also think, like you said, the studio interference in this with trying to make DC Marvel, once Warner Brothers got to that point, there was no coming back from that. And look no further than the Justice League movie. It just encompasses so many different things that was wrong with the DCEU. You have so many different voices come in where you have Zack Snyder trying to shepherd this across. Has an unimaginable tragedy in his family, so he has to step aside. And they bring in Joss Whedon, and the tone is just all over the place. It just doesn't work. And then you have the studios trying to rush this team up movie when you even haven't introduced half of the team as well. So that did them no favors too. So I think a lot of the ideas that the DCEU was trying to talk about were really strong. It's just the execution of a lot of them wasn't that great. And it's too bad because I really like Wonder Woman. I'm someone who even thinks I had a lot of fun with Aquaman, the first one. Was it very good? No, but I still had fun with it, and I thought Jason Momoa was a serviceable Aquaman and a different take on the character that has been largely laughed at for decades. But I still think that the DCEU, it could have been great. It just had a lot of issues, and I think if it had come out 10 years before the MCU started going, I think it could have had a better chance. But it didn't because it came out during the height of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, and it really became a competition of two studios. And the problem is when you have a competition, there's going to be one winner. So I think you're right. Like when the first Wonder Woman movie came out, I was thinking to myself, they are cooking. This is going to go in the right direction. They're correcting their course. This is looking great. But you mentioned Zack Snyder as sort of a visionary when it comes to sort of directing movies. He's really good at creating single shots. He's
Yep.
really creating those moments. The problem he's always had is if he is creating the source material, it doesn't have the heart it needs, if that makes sense. Like if you look at he did Watchmen. I liked Watchmen. Not everyone did. I enjoyed it. I like the ultimate cut of it, the full version of it, because the thing is, he didn't move away too much from the source material. The ending, a little bit changed. I'm actually happy with the ending he came up with. It made a little bit more sense. But when he makes his own stuff, when he makes his own sort of visions of things, it doesn't always go well. And I really felt the downturn of DC back when Batman v Superman came out, where originally it was going to be a Superman movie, but they thought no one's going to see it, so we're going to add Batman to it. So they had Batman to it, and everyone loves Batman versus Superman fight scenes. I didn't see it in theaters. I didn't have the chance to. So I saw it on DVD, but I saw the ultimate version of it, the ultimate cut version of it, which is this long 3 hour movie. And I enjoyed that. And then I went and saw the theatrical version and saw what everyone else saw.
And then you were like,
And
oh no, I understand now. I get it, everybody.
exactly. I was like, and I could see why it's over. If the producers can make them, that the studio can make them go from what was the ultimate cut down to this thing, this travesty where they're cutting storylines out and expect success, it's not going to work. So I've seen sort of the future of that for a while, and I liked Aquaman. I thought that was an interesting character of it. I thought they were, but yet again, they were trying to go down that funny, witty path, and they were losing the tones of it. And you have to go into, which is why I'm kind of excited why Gunn's getting involved in this, because he's going to change some of the tones and come in with a sort of a single vision of it. I just hope the studios don't do him wrong like they did with Zack Snyder, because I actually saw recently that he had a tragedy in his family, but he did not want to leave at that point. The studios used it as a reason to push him out, to bring in Whedon to get that more comical tone in there.
Yeah,
Like
I've
Wonder Woman 1984. That was terrible.
oh yeah, that good example of a movie that interesting premise, just
Mhm.
not there at all in terms of execution and just wildly uneven in terms of everything out there. Story, performance, tone, everything out there. Well, you mentioned James Gunn.
Mhm.
Let's segue into James Gunn taking over the DCU. And how are you feeling right now about James Gunn's vision for the DC cinematic universe or whatever, the DCU as he's calling it?
What are they calling it now?
Yeah.
So for me, first of all, as I said before, I'm a DC guy. So I have high hopes it will go well. And I have to have that feeling because they're dealing with the intellectual property that I love. That being said, James Gunn has a unique style in the sense of he likes taking, he's very comic book accurate almost, but not as we're seeing the Superman trailers and that coming out. But he also likes being witty. He likes being funny, which is, of course, what the studios want because that's what's hot right now when it comes
Yeah.
to these movies. And there's a problem for me in that some characters you can't do that with, right? So I'm wondering how those movies will come out. I'm not saying I think it's going to go badly. I just think I wonder how that's going to go. Like,
Mhm.
how is his take going to be? Because one thing I've noticed about him, especially with like Guardians of the Galaxy, was he took this D list of characters. Then now, as soon as I say it, some of your listeners will be screaming in the micro, screaming at their radio, saying they are
Look,
D list.
look. For anybody out there who doesn't think a talking raccoon and a giant fucking tree that says I am Groot isn't D-list, you're kidding yourselves. Like let's be honest. Because I'm a Marvel guy through and through, but even when they announced that, I was like, who? Like who are these people? And then as I started reading more and more on the comics, I got it. Like I understood like why James Gunn would be the one want to be the one to shepherd this into the general audience and the pop culture zeitgeist that he was in at Marvel.
Yeah, well, the thing about like Gunn is very good at doing is taking these D-list characters and bringing them to the forefront because I think what the reason it works for him is there are no expectations. I have no expectations about the Bride. I have no expectations about the Weasel. I have expectations around Batman and Superman,
Yep.
but not around these. So that's the interesting part about it. He's very good at taking these low-level characters and bringing them up. But one of the things he also does a lot of times, like he will sacrifice the emotional beats for the comic relief. He does it quite often, and I do want a little bit of emotion in there. I do want there are some sadness in these things because essentially what DC has always been about is about godlike people
Mhm.
trying to live amongst a human world, right? And there's in a lot of them, like Superman, he's invulnerable, right? I mean, really, what is Superman's challenge in life? So because of that, what sort of forces him to be relatable is his humanity.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how they're going to portray that without just saying without being wacky and silly.
That's always been kind of an issue, like you said, with James Gunn that I'm concerned about because I'm also concerned about tone disparity here too. Because on one end, I greatly appreciate that James Gunn is taking not like a far different approach that Marvel is taking, but it's different that not everything needs to be connected and everything can just kind of stand on its own to some extent or another. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm cool with that. I'm super excited that James Gunn is just letting Matt Reeves do his thing with the Batman and the Batman Part 2 or whatever it's going to be called, and that he kind of let the Penguin just do its own thing, even though it was probably pretty much mostly done when he was put in charge. And it's going to take a lot to connect those two universes, but if he just kind of lets that stand alone and just be its own thing, I'd be perfectly fine with that. And I don't think there's a problem with that either. Because one thing that I will give DC a lot of credit for is that movies aside, or live action movies, their animated movies, I think they're fantastic, but they don't get the same amount of love because most of them don't go to theater. And that sucks because I think that there was probably a huge audience for people out there. But I also think, say what you will about the Arrowverse as well, but I think that there was a lot of love for the Arrowverse that they could find some of these big opportunities to connect some of these characters, but then they could get a little weird as well. And I enjoyed that a lot about the Arrowverse too. So there's a lot of different competing things here. I am a little concerned also, not just with tone disparity and humor, but James Gunn also has a tendency to go way over the top when it comes to violence too. And I get it. These are all superheroes, but I don't think any of us want to see like Batman ripping someone's spine out or Superman accidentally punching someone's head off, which I don't think it's ever going to go that far. But I am a little concerned about some of the over-the-top violence that James Gunn kind of has a tendency to do. I'm looking at the Suicide Squad in that way, which I enjoyed the Suicide Squad a lot, but I know a lot of people who was like, it was a bit much. And even in Commandos, when we'll get to it, there was a couple scenes I was like, oh, this is a lot. And thankfully it was animated, so it's not as huge of a hit, but if it was live action, then there'd be some people would be like, I don't know about this.
Yeah, I think we'll get to it, of course, a bit, but I think it had to be an animated movie, an animated TV show, because they actually see that on film, it would not, I mean, you would lose a lot of potential audience members, not because they don't want to see it, but your 13 to 17 demographic would not be able to see that movie.
No.
As a dad of three, they're not seeing that movie. So, and I think, so the back to your original question is how am I feeling about James Gunn? I'm hopeful. I'm hoping he does what he said he's going to do, which is essentially, as you sort of mentioned, every one of these movies will be loosely connected, but we're not going to get everything interconnected, because that's the problem that I feel MCU is currently having right now is they're living under the weight of the canon. And the only way they've been able to get themselves out of it is with multiverse writing. And I think that's very lazy writing. But I hope Gunn never has that issue where essentially he even said himself, canon's kind of a loose term for him. And I know we're going to get the review about what that really means. But the nice thing about this is you said the Batman, like that movie. And it is sort of in its own world. And he's jokingly said maybe it'll be connected somehow, but probably not, because the Brave and the Bold movie will not be starring the Batman. It'll have Batman, but not the Batman. So like, there's like Suicide Squad and the Suicide Squad.
I could not believe that they just let them get away with that title, but I also understand because it's James Gunn. It's like, I want
That's
to
his
title
thing.
this The Suicide Squad. And DC was probably like, okay, that's fine.
And what's funny is I'm actually reviewing that movie. We're actually recording that episode in a couple days, and the person who picked the movie didn't realize there were two Suicide Squad movies
Oh
because of the
no.
way that marketing works.
Mm.
Because the fact that now you only hear the Suicide Squad, you're like, oh, did I see that one? Did it have Will Smith in it? No, that wasn't the Will Smith one. Like, and wasn't that? That's a whole different discussion when it comes to the Suicide Squad. I don't want to get down that path.
Right.
I got riled up on that one already. But back to this, James Gunn, like I said, he's really good in making things quirky, interesting, and I want to save some of the discussion for the Creature Commandos because I think that really illustrates the good and the bad of what he can do. And I do like the theme he's going into this new DCU with of the theme of gods and monsters, which has always been what DC is about. Like I keep going back to like Superman. I know he's not a god, but he's relatively like he's indestructible, right? Wonder Woman. You've got, I mean, Batman. The reason why everyone loves Batman is because he's human.
Yeah.
I mean, that's his defining characteristic. But he's battling amongst gods, right? So it's I'm curious where he's going to take it. Like I said, I'm very positive, but he also likes to go. He is not afraid of the comic book side of things, which is if you've seen the Superman trailer. I mean, when it comes down to like crypto and what his costumes are like, and yet again, you could be turned off by that idea. Me, I'm like, okay, I'm going to give you the chance. I'm gonna give you enough rope to hang yourself.
So, and I think that's where I think I certainly hope that most fans get to this point. I'm hopeful, but we'll see. But isn't that the problem nowadays with just fan discourse
Mm-hmm,
nowadays is that you can't please them. I work in HR and I've
mm-hmm,
realized very quick that you can't please everybody because there's always going to be someone that's pissed off.
mm-hmm.
But for a studio, think of that, but to the umpteenth degree that you can't satisfy everybody because you've got one end of the spectrum where you have all these people who have read all these comics and they're like, I don't like that shade of blue on Superman's costume. It's corn blue, but it really should be like periwinkle blue. Like shut
Yeah.
the fuck up. Like honestly, like but then there's people on the other side of the spectrum as well who's like, I don't know what that dog is. Like, is that Superman's dog or is that just a random dog that is just lives in the Arctic? Like, I don't understand that. And then there's everybody in the middle who's like, dude, I just want to be entertained. Like,
Mm-hmm.
can you just entertain me with a superhero movie, please? And that's the thing that sucks about fan discourse sometimes, that you're not going to please everybody. And the most vocal people are the ones that just are looking for something super specific and they can't get it out of their own way. That if it's not made for me specifically, then I'm not going to like it. And more importantly, I'm going to burn this thing down. Figuratively, online, through message forums and IMDb ratings and Rotten Tomato scores. different things like that.
I know what you mean. We actually just recently recorded Batman 1966.
Mhm.
And that is a very different Batman than the Batman. There's two polar opposites on the spectrum of what is Batman. It is those two movies.
Right.
And looking at it, you can go into let's say hypothetically the Batman came sorry Batman 1966 came out today. You people would love the fact it's very comic book accurate for a certain period of Batman, but it's not accurate to the current period of Batman. These characters have been around so long, so long. There's so many different iterations of it. It's amazing to me at all that anyone can like really sort of like I want the Batman that came out in 2012. Like, why do we have to be so specific with this? Yeah, for me, at the end of it just is it a good movie? Can I be entertained by it? I understand where the source material came from, and did I smile at the end of the movie? Did I have fun?
Mhm.
Was it no? Was the experience good? Because if you're sitting there going like, what color is Superman's cape during that during the movie? One, you are not enjoying. You're just analyzing for the sake of analyzing.
You're
Nitpicking.
nitpicking. Yeah, that's all.
Enjoy it and say to yourself, was the narrative good? Was the pacing good? No, did I enjoy the movie? Did I check my watch at the 62-minute mark? That's all that's important.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I keep going back to this. I have high hopes James Gunn will do well, not because I have any evidence that he will, because I need him to, because I don't want to wait another 20 years for DC to relaunch again. I'm getting old. I don't need this. I can't wait that long.
Well, okay, slightly counterpoint to that.
Okay.
We do have three pieces of evidence for what James Gunn has been doing with DC so far. There's
Mhm.
the Suicide Squad, not to be mistaken for David Ayer's Suicide Squad, sans and still awaiting the Ayer's cut as I understand it.
Mhm.
There's Peacemaker as well. And then we've got Creature Commandos, which is a segue into what do you know about Creature Commandos before watching this show?
Pretty much absolutely nothing. And that's really speaks to what Gunn does. He goes out and finds these really lesser known characters and takes for now, mind you, I knew a couple other Task Force because this is Task Force M. It's one of those.
Mhm.
I knew, of course, the Suicide Squad. I also knew about Task Force Z, which is about zombies specifically.
Yeah.
But beyond that, like Creature Commandos, it's a book that I guess has been rebooted a couple different times. So it was such a deep cut for me that I'd never even heard of it. They could have made up every one of those characters in that show until the show came out, and I would have no idea. Now, mind you, I've done all the deep dives and figured out who those people are and looked into it. But at the time, they could have been here are 6 characters you've never heard of because we all made them up today.
Yep. That is largely how I went into this going forward. Or like at first, I had no idea that Creature Commandos was a thing. Now, when James Gunn announced this, I was curious to say the least because, like you said, he's done a great job of bringing not only the Guardians of the Galaxy to the forefront, but even just some of these random people in the Suicide Squad. Like, I didn't know that there was a polka dot man or
The
anything like
Javelin.
that. Yeah, and anything like that. But that's what James Gunn does. Like you said, he knows how to introduce a character that nobody knows about and make them palatable for a general audience. And then for those people who are looking for somebody to root for, then that's James Gunn's bread and butter right there as well. So let's get into it. Let's start with spoiler-free talks before we kind of just rip the Band-Aid off. And what we're going to do first, this is a little tricky when it comes to TV shows because with it being episodic by nature, not every episode is going to hit for everybody, and that's fine. It is what it is. And I don't foresee us going episode by episode because I think we're just going to pick and choose
Mhm.
the different things that we're going to talk about. But overall, we've got pseudo scale in terms
Mhm.
of what we thought. So on this scale, for Creature Commandos, did you like it, love it, hate it, dislike it, or just think it was okay?
I probably, if I had to pick one thing for the entire show, I'd go with Love It because it hit a couple sweet spots for me.
Yeah. I'm not quite at loved it.
Mhm.
I'm like right there though. Like over halfway like into like I really liked it. And I think that this was a smart choice for James Gunn to start off the DCU with this one as the first like quote unquote official thing. So it sounds like we both really liked it, which is great because if this was a big swing and a miss, then I think everybody would be a little concerned about things moving forward. I am a little concerned though, because I feel like you and I are the only two who are talking about this a little bit.
Yeah, so that's one of the things I thought was interesting about it. I think it's let's take a step back and look at it from a studio's perspective. I think this was a brilliant way to open the DCU because if it misses, no one's going to know. And at the same time, for those who have not seen the show, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but in the first, I'd say 10 minutes of the first episode, you know what's canon from the previous universe and what's not canon from the previous universe. So it's like, here's your crib sheet. Let's move on. Forget about the rest. There's no big thinking you have to worry about. And I like that because going into it, you're saying to yourself, is it canon? Is not? Because he also worked on the Suicide Squad. No, what works, what doesn't work. And he just literally tells you what's real and what's not real. But going into the nice thing is, I think the reason not people are talking about it because the only people talking about it were already DC fans or already comic book fans. So the general public isn't talking about it. And I know you're borderline like it, love it. If this was a movie or attempted as a movie, I would not love it. I would have liked it. As a TV show, I love it because the format he uses in it works for a TV show. And I think the story that, and to give your audience a little bit of idea if they haven't seen it, is every episode past the first one is really there. It's really like a vignette, meaning it's a look back of each character. It's a character analysis of each of the characters of the of Task Force M. And there's a very thin, simple, overarching plot, right? There's not really much that happens in the overarching plot that happens now. So in a movie format, it wouldn't work. It's too little.
Yeah, because you would probably only focus on maybe one, maybe two characters.
Yep.
And if there was two characters that there would probably be a tandem of two characters that would probably be focused on, given kind of the direction of this. And we'll get into this once we get a little bit into spoiler talks. But yeah, if this was a movie, you wouldn't be able to get backstory on every single one of these characters. And quite frankly, as somebody who this kind of pissed me off a little bit about the first Guardians movie, it's like I don't know much about Drax other than the things that he tells me in the movies, but I also think we also never got much backstory from Drax because they eventually just slid him into comic relief.
Yep.
Only. That's really about it. And with this, I found myself way more invested in the backstories of all of these episodes as opposed to the paper thin. I don't really care about what this team is actually doing per se, because that it seems superfluous to some of the backstory and some of the things that I actually kind of cared about.
On our movie Smash show, we often talk about this. The problem with an origin story. The problem with an origin story, there's a lot of heavy lifting that has to happen. And two of the three of us are really against origin stories because you like Superman 77. You don't see Superman show up until halfway through the movie. That's a problem.
Yeah.
And this is the way to really illustrate someone's origin without it having to worry about you're losing the plot. So I think really this season of Creature Commandos is really just what are the origin of each of these characters? Why should I care about them? Why should they are literal monsters. Why should I care about these people without having to worry about the issue of let's go back 40 years and start the story there? And it would have dragged on so much. But I think you're right. This way of illustrating these backstories makes you care about them. And you're curious, like, oh, this is what we're going to do. What's going to happen with Mr. Phosphorus or Dr. Phosphorus, whatever his name is.
Oh
Or
yes,
like,
you can't. He worked very hard for that degree and make sure that you
yeah.
properly name Dr. Phosphorus in
and,
that way.
and at some point you're like, okay, the Weasel, what is this backstory of the Weasel? And he supposedly killed 27 children. I may not want to see that backstory, but we get the backstory. Spoiler free, we get the backstory.
We get the backstory, and even with some of these other characters, you do realize that it is a societal problem at the end of the day why a lot of these people are considered monsters, quote unquote. So, for example, Nina. Nina is a good example of that. Is I don't I she sometimes a lot of times does not fit with this particular group of
Mhm.
people. And it does show because she's not overly violent, but the way she's been treated is definitely why she fits in. And also a big reason why she was picked as someone to be part of this group as a way to kind of balance them out too. And then even so, one other character, and you identified it as your favorite character because it is also my favorite character. GI Robot is it's Captain America in a lot of ways, but it's also kind of interesting because this character, he's been programmed to do one thing, killing Nazis.
Mhm.
That's it. And for it to be brought to the forefront in terms of a modern context as well, and all he wants to do is just be part of a crew. That's it. He wants to be part of a crew. He just wants to do his mission, and that's it. That's all he wants. And the backstory behind that, and just how he got from where he was at in World War II to where he is today, that was brilliant as well. I really enjoyed that. I'm ready to get into some spoiler talk with this, but largely I agree with everything that you said. And one thing that we'll talk about a little bit more is that why this could not be live action. Like there's no
Yep.
way that this could have been
No.
live action. Mainly because you mentioned that it's lower risk, but also it's much quicker to produce something that's animated. So get it out for people to enjoy. And I think we're kind of in a renaissance now of adult animation, which I greatly appreciate that because not all animation needs to be for children.
Yep.
Believe it or not, there's plenty of adults out there that love animation as a medium to tell stories. So this is your official warning that we're going to get into spoiler talk. And let's start with the things that we like. So I figured we can go back and forth in terms of you say something that you like, we'll talk about it, and then I'll say something that I like. And then we'll go through that until we get to a point where we should move on to some of the things that we didn't really like. So, Chris, go ahead. What's
Sure.
one
One
thing that you really liked? Take the gloves off. Spoilers ahead. Go for it.
Sure. One of the things I enjoy, I like starting big and working our way down. So as we go through this, the big thing for me is that, and one of the many hats I wear in my life is I do what's called developmental editing, which is essentially helping people build stories. So I like the fact that when it came to this story, he stuck with the idea of every episode is a backstory.
Mhm.
Every episode, even the last one, is a backstory, right?
Yeah.
And normally a lot of TV shows that might be one episode here or there, right? Or the only one that did that is like Lost.
Yeah.
But totally
Until
different show, and I don't want to traumatize anyone by bringing that up again.
well, until it wasn't backstories and
And once we've done the backstory, everybody else we killed everybody. So, but
that's true.
back to the story though, it's like I like that format for it. Now, I hope they do not keep that format for the next season, even though we're going to have some new characters being introduced. We've got that. Now I know why I'm supposed to like them and why I'm not supposed to like them, and I like that he stuck to that theme for the whole thing because that's a risk.
Very much so. And not all the backstories work. And that's fine. There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with that. So I suppose I should have said this before. So our core team for Creature Commandos consists of the bride, who is the Bride of Frankenstein. Yeah, just straight up. Like I did not realize that the Bride of Frankenstein was in DC comic lore. And it makes sense because why not? I guess. But yeah, she is pretty much a badass version of the Bride of Frankenstein. Then you've got Dr. Phosphorus, who he has been like destroyed by atomic energy, and he is now just a walking skull or skeleton who just lights things on fire. We've got Nina, who is a she was born with lungs outside her body, and then her father decided to do a procedure to have her have the ability to breathe underwater at the expense of her looking like a fish moving forward. You've got GI Robot, who is a robot that kills Nazis, and that is the function of this robot. And then you've got the Weasel, who is a
Weasel.
weasel. That's what you think at first. And then you have the leader of this group, which is Rick Flag Sr., not to be mistaken by I guess Rick Flag Jr., who was the one that was in Suicide Squad and the Suicide Squad. Rick Flag Sr. is his father. So that is the group. I miss.
Now, one thing we had to bring up too is why this group even exists because of the Suicide Squad and the Operation Starfish that the U.S. government has determined you can no longer have these meta-human superhero groups anymore. So Waller says they can't be human. What about monsters? And that's where this comes from. So every one of these things are effectively, except for the fish lady, are
Yeah.
actually born as a monster
Right.
Supposedly. Well, I guess Miss Doc Phosphorus wasn't either.
Yeah.
So she looks at these people, since they're monstrous, that counts as being a monster.
Yes. So Amanda Waller, who, from a continuity standpoint, is a carryover from the DCEU, which I've got some mixed thoughts on that. So I'm excited to talk through some of my feelings about that. But she has put together this group simply for semantics purposes. They're not humans, so I can get away with it because they're monsters. And that's fine. Because they're one thing that I greatly enjoyed is that James Gunn knows how to bring a team together and knows how to get everyone to understand what their role is. Because Rick Flag Sr. was brought in to like corral all these people, but by the end, that's not the one who's going to be in charge of this group. And I am perfectly okay with that. And another thing is that there are a number of people here who have pretty much deferred to the fact that, like, hey, I am perfectly fine by the end of this following the bride's lead with this, because she has proven throughout the course of this series that she can be the one with the capability to corral this group and lead them moving forward. And it doesn't always hit at times because Weasel is, like you said, is just Weasel the whole time, except for that backstory.
Mm-hmm.
That backstory broke my heart.
It surprised you, didn't it?
It did. It did. Well, it surprised me, but it also doesn't surprise me because James Gunn knows how to do emotional backstory really well. Because I'm looking at the backstory that they gave Rocket in Guardians of
Mm-hmm.
the Galaxy Volume 3. Not what I was expecting, but boy, was it effective. And it gives credence to a character that you may not think much of before, but after this is Weasel's second appearance, because he was briefly in the Suicide Squad, it at least gives a little context, and maybe he'll do something in the future. Because all Weasel wants at the end of the day is just he wants to be kind of similar to GI Robot. He wants to be part of a group, and he doesn't want to be looked at like he's a freak.
And he wants
That's
to play. He wants to
wants to
play
play fetch.
fetch.
He
Yeah,
wants to play a shitload of fetch.
yeah.
Can't forget about that.
So I know we're going to say what we don't like about it, but it brings up one thing for me though: is every one of these stories we feel for the monster with the backstories. Like, God is very good at humanizing them, saying
Mm-hmm.
the bride, oh yeah, she's a bunch of corpses, but here's why you need to like her. Weasel killed 27 children. No, not really. They died in a fire that he was at while he was trying to save them. He's not really a killer. Phosphorus, he's the Dr. Freeze of this show because his wife was taken from him. He's getting revenge. He's doing this villainous things at some point, and now we understand that he's actually human deep down. And she tragic story with the lung disease, and then to save her life, she has to become this fish. And then at the end of the day, her father's killed because humans are the true monsters of everything here. I would have loved it if one of those characters, I don't know which one, was actually evil. Like, because why are they in prison? We see why they go into prison. We understand why. That's part of the backstory. I guess because GI Robot is the only one who truly isn't evil at any level whatsoever. But I would have loved it if one of the five, as the twist, was truly a villain through and through.
So I agree with you on that because did you see the Penguin?
I have not seen it yet.
Okay. So your point about making one of these characters evil and a villain is something that they address very much so in The Penguin, where you think that this whole story, they're trying to humanize this person, and then towards the final set of episodes, like, nope, this this guy is
He's bad.
evil through and through. Do you have anyone in particular that you think could have filled that role? Because I have two,
Mhm.
and one's kind of a cheat because he's technically not in the group.
So it's interesting you said. So narratively speaking, I understand the Weasel's backstory being what it is. That was shocking, right? And in fact, like, oh, he didn't really eat 27 children. That's not a thing. The bride, so looking story, like Dr. Phosphorus is the easy answer.
Yeah.
Right. He's the easy answer. The problem is though, it's the easy answer.
It is.
I would love it if sorry, go ahead.
Well, it is the easy answer because also there's two things about this. One is that when it comes to actually like being a criminal per se, Dr. Phosphorus is the closest one to that. Because his backstory is that he's looking for a way to what, like cure cancer or
Yeah, I think in this version of him, it's the cure cancer.
so He's looking to do that, and he gets caught up with the wrong people, and they not only murder his wife, but they brutally murder his son as well. And this is stuff like that. That is the over the top stuff from James Gunn that I'm like, dude, like, really? Like, it wasn't enough that you killed both of them. It
Mhm.
wasn't enough that you stacked their bodies on top of one another. It's another thing for these clearly evil people to make Dr. Phosphorus or pre-Dr. Phosphorus, Prosperous, if I may, pat the blood on of their bodies and be like, "You did this. This is all your fault." Like, dude, like
They framed him for the murder.
as somebody who's a parent, that got to me a lot. But after he is turned into Dr. Phosphorus, he's like, this criminal enterprise is now mine. And you're right. It's way too easy of an answer because he's the only one that you could see out of this group is like, yeah, you're actually a criminal. And
Yeah.
that makes sense.
He went to, or for our listeners too, he goes the route of becoming effectively the Punisher,
Mhm.
wipes out this mob, but instead of walking away, he says, well, now I'm going to run it and do a little dance number in a disco while Batman watches from the skylight. So I think it's an easy answer. Nina, on the other hand, this is going to sound weird to say this, but if she had been like truly a horrific person underneath this facade, that would have been shocking.
Yes, because Nina, so little backstory. Nina, she Waller picks her to be in this group because she believes that Nina's the only one that can kind of bring balance to the force in a way. All these people, they're straight up killers. Nina's not. She is not a killer at all by any stretch of the imagination. But if it would have flipped at the end of the series and instead because she's tasked with she's going to kill this princess who that's the main thing that's driving the actual story moving forward is that this group is supposed to protect this princess in this made up country as a way to protect her. So shenanigans ensue. They go from protecting her, then they got to kill her, then we got to protect her again. But if Nina would have been the one that's like, I'll do it, and she just does it mercilessly, and she's actually like, instead of being a minnow, she's actually a shark. I think that that would have been interesting. But instead, they turned around and then they just brutally kill her. And I was sad when that happened, but also there was also a potential sense of relief because she did not fit in with this group.
I agree with that. And in fact, to the point where the whole time, the whole series going, I was wondering, Waller's supposed to be brilliant. She's a brilliant tactician. She's a strategist. She's on the level of Batman level of intelligence.
Mhm.
And for her to say, yeah, choose the fish lady because she can swim good, like that was, you're like, there's got to be something else. There's got to be a reason she's putting it. She just doesn't want to tell Flag because she is very secretive and does not give everyone all the information. And I was like, maybe in her backstory, she goes from this timid creature to just being the creature from the Black Lagoon that she is,
Yeah.
where she will just devour someone or she'll swim up and murder. Like that's shot. Honestly, the shots of her swimming up under the princess, great shots. And if that at that point she had murdered the princess, or at least attempted to murder the princess, maybe she attempts and she gets pushed back. I don't know. It doesn't really matter so much. The point is, if she had been the true villain, that would have been phenomenal.
Yeah. So the other person that I thought could be, yeah, you're straight through and through the villain
Mhm.
is Eric Frankenstein. And so, yes, Eric Frankenstein is not a metaphor for anything. He's literally just Frankenstein's monster. And however, some key differences in terms of backstory is that he, similar to what happens in pop culture lore, is that he asks Dr. Frankenstein to make him a bride because he's lonely. Because the creature, as he's known in pop culture lore, is that he is not somebody to be trifled with. He is a tall, brooding individual, but he's also grotesquely hideous as well. But he asked Dr. Frankenstein to make the bride, and he becomes so obsessed with all of this to find that Dr. Frankenstein not only created the bride, but has also, I think, fall in love is a strong word because I don't think that
Infatuated.
very much infatuated with Dr. Frankenstein was very much infatuated with the bride. And we as a the listening audience or the viewers of this show are treated to her backstory of them two having sex together, which was like, huh, okay.
There's so many things wrong with that. And like philosophy wise, there's so many things wrong with that. But you're right. That's what sets Eric Eric Frankenstein off.
The way that he murders Dr. Frankenstein is brutal. And I'm very happy that we did not get to see it because throughout the course of the series, we do see the amount of damage that Eric Frankenstein could do. And I think if there's anybody that is quote unquote evil, it like he's another one that, yeah, it makes sense why Eric Frankenstein would be evil because society has treated him like shit for a very long time and he's been spurned by the bride. Now, I want to make this very clear, and I'm not saying this lightly, and this, I feel like this shouldn't be said. We here at SPDM TV believe that no means no, plain and simple. So, Eric Frankenstein should take a hint. The bride is not going to go back to him, especially after what he did to Dr. Frankenstein. But for society to shun him, his love, the bride, quote unquote, to shun him like that, Eric Frankenstein feels like at some point he could be a very compelling evil villain. And his, quote unquote, a little bit of his backstory very much shows that as well.
Well, essentially, Eric doesn't mature past the age of 15 or 16.
No.
He's stuck in that mindset. Like he understands other issues and he's like, I'm a man, I need a bride. That's it to him. It's black and white thinking. He's like, that's what it's supposed to be. So I'm supposed to make me one. And he makes one. And of course, he doesn't understand that what was made for him does not want him because she has free will, just as he does. Now, what's interesting is he doesn't mature past that 15, 16. He's just a brute at that point. She, on the other hand, matures and accelerates well past him. And to the point where like she's effectively an adult and can communicate as one and has emotions of one by, I don't know how much time had passed that point, but it feels like it was only 6 months, maybe a year.
Yeah.
And he has, and that's how the relationship going forward through the centuries goes, because he is constantly pursuing her and she's constantly saying no with a variety of words, machine guns, bats.
Yeah.
Punch them in the face. I did like that montage. That was a beautiful montage.
That was a great montage. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think his maturity stagnated at some point, while hers did not, which makes it even more infuriating for her because I have said no to you over the past 300 years. You should take a hint by this point. And him, black and white thinking, she was made for me. She is the only one for me. Because we also see in it's episode 1 or 2 where he's on that boat where he has women around him, right? Mm-hmm. But the fact is that she is the one made for him. And he falls into that sort of linear thinking. He must go for that then. That's what his destiny is. And that's a problem. And you're right. He could have easily been just an overarching villain, but he's almost like comic relief in the background, except the fact that he can beat the hell out of you and survive Clayface, which we have not mentioned that Clayface is in this show. And and Clayface is evil. I mean, Clayface is straight up, he murders someone, he lives in their house with the body still there and goes and teaches her classes for her, like keeps her job going, maintains this facade. And then he effectively just pummels Flag to almost death and almost kills Frankenstein, who is an immortal being.
Yeah.
So Clayface has definitely been powered up in this show versus previous iterations of him.
And it was a little unexpected to get Clayface. However, also it makes sense that given what they needed a character to do like that. And I gotta admit, Clayface is having a hell of a year because between this and did you see Batman Caped Crusader, the animated series on Amazon?
I did, yes. Loved it.
Yeah, I loved it too. And the Clayface episode was a fun take on Hollywood. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize that in my life I was missing Batman getting into a sword fight. So that checks another one off of that box. Thanks 2024 for that. But I thought that was a cool take to take a character that is potentially lesser known and adding it to this, and just another way for James Gunn to be like, look, if you're going to give me the chest, I'm going to dig deep into this.
The one thing I did like about it is Clayface as a character. I'm not sure you talked about the Caped Crusader version of him, but also one from the animated series. Clayface has always been a tragic figure that fell into the problem of pride, right? He wanted to always look good and he wanted to be an actor and he was never getting the great part. So he fell into that sort of tragic figure because his own hubris led him down that path. He wasn't necessarily a bad person. He just had just ill intent for himself, like what he wanted. And to take that kind of character, like a Mr. Freeze kind of character, and make him just a psychopath effectively in this show. So he went the opposite way. So you think about all the characters we've had as like Jared Baxter was like Weasel, where we thought he killed all these kids. No, he didn't. He was trying to save them. Or or the bride, where she's just being chased by a stalker for 200 years, right? So so these monsters aren't really bad, but this one guy who we've known the backstory for 20 years. No, he's not a tragic figure. I'm sorry. No, he's just gonna just murder you. He will live in your house and he does not care. And for whatever reason, walking a cat on a leash is a bad omen.
Yeah, that very very true. That should be a tell for anybody out there is that if you're walking a cat around in a leash, ooh, watch out.
I do love that Eric Frankenstein believes in the gypsy, superstitions.
Mhm.
Because for those who have not watched the show yet, effectively when he escapes Frankenstein's castle with the Great Fire, a blind gypsy woman takes him in to help recover his strength, and she doesn't know what he looks like. She doesn't know he's a corpse, and he starts learning things from her, and it's all superstition based.
Mhm.
So a lot of this comes from her and the way she did things. Now, of course, the end of her story is a tragic one as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about backstory versus main story. We talked a little bit about lesser known characters, bringing them to life. One thing that I'll mention that I liked, I like James Gunn's humor. I really do, and it's not going to be for everybody because as somebody who appreciates pop culture references, James Gunn's really good at that. So I did appreciate that, but I also appreciate the fact that he knows how to turn a phrase and he can be very smart with his humor, but he also knows when to use it. He knows sometimes it's not appropriate to use humor. And then there's plenty of times where he's like, dude, really? Like, we don't need humor right now. But I thought the show was very funny, and this tone is not going to work for every DC property moving forward.
Very true.
It works for this, though. And that's something, that's one of the James Gunn hallmarks that I really like about this, and that I know he did really well with this for me, at least.
One thing now, I don't know if this is James Gunn or just the people he hires, but one thing I do like about his movies, music selection,
Oh yeah.
his ability to build a soundtrack. And I grew up at a time when soundtracks were a thing, where you buy this. Sometimes you bought the soundtrack and didn't even see the movie.
Yeah.
It didn't matter so much. Or there was always that one song only released on it. The soundtracks he builds for his movies, like in this one, it's very eclectic. It's very different. Like I had never heard any of the music that was on there, but I loved it. I loved every little bit of it. And so we're still doing the things we like. And the one of the things I like is his ability to create these soundtracks, which are part of the story themselves. They're not just music playing in the background. They are part of the story.
Yeah. Well, between the soundtrack, the animation as well, I thought the animation was good for the most part. We're not doing anything like incredibly groundbreaking, but there were some shots in here. It's like if I could, I would take this and I would frame it because there were some shots in here, like in every movie, that I really enjoyed. So, and I do think that animation is was a strong decision for this to not only fast track it, but also you can get away with some of the more violent imagery in animation in a way that you can't in real life. Because I look back at the Dr. Phosphorus situation where he is literally melting people to death.
Where he
Watching,
stands on the road and the tank drives through him.
right.
And he puts his middle finger up and burns his middle finger in some guy's head as he just rolls past him.
GI robot just rising into the air and just killing all of these people with like this humongous machine gun, which that whole part I was very giddy about. I thought that that was really cool. But then to see what GI Robot does at the like we're at
The meeting hall.
a meeting hall of some type where they're not like your conventional definition of Nazis, but that's kind of the problem with society today is that you're calling it something else, but you're taking ideology from Nazism. That's what these people are doing. And GI Robot is like, fuck, they're Nazis. And then he just goes from there. Yeah.
I think GI Robot. Yeah, I was about to say before you start bringing up GI Robot, like we need to talk about GI Robot.
Yes.
As a character, so he's simple. He is one dimensional out of the gate in the sense of I want to kill Nazis. You tell me he's a Nazi, he's dead. But when we learn from his backstories, yeah, that's how he was created. And he had a camaraderie of guys, a troop he went through with, a squad, and he killed Nazis. And he kept track of how many Nazis he killed and how many battles he was at. And he's also the second model, so he has a 2 on his head. And especially because there have been other GI robots in this universe. And then when we get to his backstory, every time there's a piece of his backstory, all he wants to know is, are you a Nazi or not?
Yeah.
But he is, by one doctor, one professor asks him the question of like, what makes you happy? Like, what do you want? And he goes, I wish I could see all my friends again so we can kill Nazis together. Well, there's that little tidbit of, I want to see my friends, which is why he and Nina connect so well. But then we get to this more the most recent part of his backstory, which is where he is bought out of a surplus, a military surplus, place where you can buy memorabilia, that kind of stuff. And he's bought, and then he gets turned back on again. And the guy becomes his friend. They watch TV shows together, and there's this connection of basically a guy who likes to collect stuff. Right? He likes to collect World War II memorabilia. And he goes, hey, now I'm going to take you to this meeting hall where you can meet some of my friends, where we talk about society. We talk about things that we want to improve. And then the guy pulls back the curtain, and it's the logo.
As soon as he said, I'm going to take you to a meeting, I'm like, oh no. Oh no. I knew where it was going, but yeah.
The reason I bring it up too is like Gunn has a good way of subtly talking about societal problems in his movies without hitting someone over the head. Because effectively that is the pipeline someone might go down, right? They're befriended by somebody when they're down on the luck and they're brought to this meeting and so on and so forth. But G.I. Robot does not care about you as a friend. He likes friends. But the other day, there is one paramount and paradigm thing in his mind. You kill the Nazis. And the smile that, if a robot could smile, that was G.I. Robot when that moment happened. And he's like, oh, I'm back, baby. And just obliterates that meeting hall.
Yes. Some of the funnier moments when the Creature Commando group, Task Force M, are together is when G.I. Robot is like, will you kill Nazis with me? Or are these Nazis? And like when everything's going on, he's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know if these people are Nazis or not. And then eventually they're like, yes, they're all Nazis. And he's like, brilliant. Let's do it. And then he just goes from there. So the funny moments are there. And the reason why I bring up the Captain America parallel is because if you think about Captain America as a character, I'm assuming that the US government would probably want what G.I. Robot is to be what Captain America is. Just, you're going to kill a bunch of Nazis, you're going to serve your purpose, and then you're just going to go away. That's really it. You're just going to be a tool of the US government, US military specifically. Mm-hmm. But they both go through this process where they are people who are just out of time. And not like, hey, you're at the end of your line, but you are out of the time that you were meant to be in. And the struggle of adjusting to that was something that I greatly appreciated about G.I. Robot's storyline, because unlike Captain America, where he feels the need that he's got to adapt to modern times, G.I. Robot's like, nope, I just still want to kill Nazis. And because he's a robot, like, unless you like reprogram him, like because going into something that I didn't like, I don't like how early they killed G.I. Robot. I don't. Like, I think that was way too soon to do that. But to know that he is coming back potentially for a season 2 as a bulkier version, I'm curious / concerned if they did anything different with him. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah,
time will tell.
One thing I missed, and I should have checked it, but I forgot to check it. Did the number change on his head or not?
That's a good question. Yeah.
And I had to go back and rewatch. I'm rewatching it now. And because if the number's still 2, then we know it's the same guy. If it's a 3, it's the next one.
It's a different version, and it's still same mission, kill Nazis, but makes you wonder what else did they put in there?
Exactly.
Did they potentially put a kill switch in? Because I could totally see that with Waller covering her ass and being like, hey, if this task force gets to be too much, we're gonna execute Order 66, all of these people, and you're just gonna be done. And then G.I. Robot's gonna fly home, and then that's it.
And that's the end of the day.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you liked that you talked a little bit about the continuity and canon part of this, because I'm a little bit more on the fence about that. And I think it makes sense why James Gunn would want to bring some of those characters from the DCEU into this DCU now. And it's very conveniently most of the ones that he's shepherded.
It's all the ones he shepherded.
Yeah. So it makes sense for that. There's only one that kind of confused me a little bit, and it kind of makes me wonder. It's the Batman of it all. And granted, all we see is a silhouette. It's
Mhm.
not like we're seeing a specific version of Batman. It's not like Batman spoke or anything like that. I think that was one where I was like, that's a choice. Okay, that's fine. But that's and I fully recognize that this is a me thing because when I see something like that, I get all up in my head and be like, wait a second, like Batman. Okay, that makes sense. But which Batman is it? And this is for me what my friend Nick, that I do another podcast with, this is a very much shut up nerd moment because that's one where it's like, dude, it's just Batman. Who cares? But I could not get it out of my head.
So Gunn has actually come out and said that the Batman you're seeing there is the Batman of this universe, obviously, but
Mm,
it is not the Batman from the previous. That's not a carryover.
okay.
So, and the reason he's doing that, which one, he's a little beefier, like in the silhouette. He's a big dude. He said the look isn't perfect yet, meaning that they haven't decided, which is why it's only a silhouette. Which is why when you see him with a spear through him, it's kind, you can only sort of make out his costume. But this is not the Ben Affleck Batman. That Batman, that Jared Leto Joker, all that does not exist in this universe unless he decides it does. But to this point, it does not, because also the Reeves Batman is not part of this universe either right now. Now so what I understand, there's been some talks about it, but as of right now, Reeves is just like, no, I just want to make a Batman story, and then I'm out.
Yeah.
And so that story, so those Batmans don't exist. Those Batman we're seeing there is like seeing in the background the Flash, or seeing in the background anyone but the Vigilante and the Peacemaker, essentially. And because those two are from his original project, of course, he made the project. He wants it to continue to exist. And Peacemaker season 2 is coming out
Allegedly this year. Yeah.
later this year. So why would he want to risk all that and just keep the parts in there? But it kind of means Suicide Squad. I gotta make sure I have the thing right. Suicide Squad does not exist,
Yeah.
but the Suicide Squad does, because unless he directly mentions something in those movies, that movie does not exist. Which means Blue Beetle doesn't exist. Which means the Justice League doesn't exist yet. And he also said that all the superheroes we know and love have been around for a while. This is the age of superheroes that we're living in, which means very few origin stories the way we would think of an origin story, which I love, by the way.
Yeah.
Because I'm not a big fan of origin stories. Because I don't need to see Martha die in Crime Alley for the umpteenth time.
Why? Why not? Like you did like what about for the handful of people out there who didn't know that Batman's parents were killed in an alley
Literally
by,
named Crime Alley.
yeah, literally named Crime Alley. Yeah, like I'm with you there. I don't need to see that. I don't need to see a lot of that. I'm hoping that James Gunn gives his audience a little bit of credit, which
Mhm.
he's done a good job of at least doing that for us. But from a continuity standpoint, the other problem I have is with Amanda Waller and with Rick Flag, because those were carryovers from Suicide Squad that were brought over to the Suicide Squad, and this is where the continuity gets a little murky for me. And granted, Rick Flag Jr. is not in this, but he is referred to in the past tense
Mhm.
by Rick Flag Sr. But it's like, dude, he came from Suicide Squad. Do we not remember this? And like, we try to forget about that Suicide Squad
Yeah.
movie, all of its warts and all. But, and I get why you want to bring Amanda Waller back, because Waller is like a very important part of all of this. Plus, you don't waste somebody like Viola Davis
I know.
like that.
She's great talent.
You absolutely do not, which that's something that Marvel has done way too much, is you bring in someone uber talented and then you waste them on a bit part and then we're never going to see them again.
Like Doctor Strange, the Multiverse of Madness, and Charlize Theron showing up for like 30 seconds.
Allegedly, she's gonna come back. Well, we'll
We'll
see.
find out.
We'll find out. I'm even talking about someone like Christian Bale, for example. You bring him in as a
Mhm.
villain and you do some interesting stuff with him, and then now he's gone.
Can't bring her
And
back. Yeah.
so Marvel has a consistent problem with that, and I do think that James Gunn has taken a lot of notes of what he's learned from Marvel and be like, I ain't doing that. And it is not lost on me that there was a line at the end of this that talks about like she's just like a princess. Who cares? And to me, I was like, is that a shot at Disney a little bit? Like,
That's a good insight. I didn't really think about it that way, but yeah.
and I'm all here for that, but I I I'd like to think that James Gunn, who had a very tumultuous relationship with Marvel and Disney, because
Especially by the end. Yeah.
it, like towards the end, but also can't forget he was fired by them for past tweets and then had to be brought back because pretty much the entire cast was going to mutiny if he wasn't going to be there. So I'm curious from a continuity standpoint what's going to stick, and I guess this is kind of a segue into negatives, and this is more of a what if. That's a double meaning actually, because if are we going to bring these people into live action?
Some
Like
of them, yes. Flag
okay,
is. Waller is.
Flag and Waller are, but that's had mixed results. And I don't want to project too much because Marvel did it and it was like with What If, and I was
Yeah.
like, I'm not sure how I feel about this. And this is where the continuity starts to become a bit of an issue for me because it's like you're gonna put these people in animation and then you bring them into live action and the transition isn't always smooth. Like someone like Weasel, yeah, that makes sense. It's a giant fucking weasel. Like
Yeah. It's all CGI.
what are you gonna look for? And also, Sean Gunn's performance as both GI Robot and the Weasel, perfect. Love it.
Love
Keep
it.
keep going with that. But I am just concerned about continuity from that perspective as well, because taking somebody live action and putting them in animation, that's a little easier. Doing it the
Mhm.
other way has some mixed results. And I can't fault the show for that because nothing like that has even happened yet per se,
Yeah.
but I'm just reading tea leaves and I'm just wondering if that's going to be an issue down the road.
Well, I think the ones they're going to bring over are going to be either A, the CGI heavy characters like the Weasel or Clayface. But I think the if they even go Clayface, because that'd be really hard to do CGI without looking stupid. But like Waller and like Flag, the people doing the voice character for them are the same people who cast for them for the live action as well, which is why they took their images to use for the animation. So, and they're also doing bit parts. I believe Flag is in the new Superman movie coming out, but it's a very bit part. So, and one thing Gunn's always been good at, I say that because this is a lot, is Easter eggs.
Yep.
Little characters in the background, or they have one interaction like, oh, I know that guy, right? Which is you see a lot of that with his work, and I think that's where these characters will become. They'll have not two bit parts, but I mean like their parts they won't be main characters. And that being said, of course, Waller is getting her own TV show in 2026.
I'll watch it.
Yeah, I'll watch it too.
I'm there for it. That's cool. So yeah, we I guess this is a good time just to talk about what else we didn't like. Any so you mentioned that you wish somebody from Task Force M was truly going to be a villain, maybe not the villain, but a
Yeah.
villain. Because even the villain that they had for this, Circe, I believe the villain's name, a little muddled because we're not sure what to trust from Circe. Yeah, it's kind
Yeah,
of interesting, and it doesn't always work.
Yeah, Cersei's trying to kill the princess because the princess is gonna bring about World War III and take over the world. And Waller sees the same vision. She passes the vision over to Waller, but we don't believe her. Or sorry, we believe her, so that's why we're gonna kill her. But come to find out, we've been tricked by Clayface. It's a lot of twists and turns, so I'm not doing it any justice on I mean walking through it. But at the end of the day, the princess still gets killed.
Yeah.
Because so we do believe her, we don't believe her, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we do end up killing the princess. At least the bride does. So there are no true heavy villains. Like there's no like this is who I'm working against, right? The actual supposed villain of the entire show is the princess and Grodd, who is from a vision. But that's the true villains of the story. But we don't. They're never really the antagonists of the story. If
Right.
that makes any sense.
That that does make sense. Yeah, I get what you're saying there. And I'm not saying I even need a villain per
Yeah.
se, or like a main antagonist, because I think this also does a good job of saying society is the villain as well, who society as a whole has made their judgment on these creatures, and then that's it. There's no going back for that. And what I like about this, going back to some of the things I like, is each of these characters is kind of portraying some different parts of society that we can take a look at and be like, oh, that's not good. Kind of like what you were talking about with the social commentary stuff that's not overtly beating you over the head. Because like with Nina, you can make a case about law enforcement pretty
Mm-hmm.
good about that, but also you can make a case about the plights of science, which connects very well to Dr. Phosphorus's story. You could make the connection with that with the bride as well about how hubris when it comes to science is a major issue and how science can easily be corrupted or manipulated in the name of money as well. So I like how it takes a lot of those themes, doesn't beat you over the head too much with that, and kind of go from there. But I think this was something when it comes to like lacking a true villain. I'm not going to go so far as to say that this was like some of the worst Marvel or DC live action movies where it's like this is a villain and it's like cartoonishly bad, which is ironic because this is a cartoon. But this it's something that I think it was just missing, but it's not going to detract how much I like the show.
Well, that's what I was saying earlier too. Like this show, it's the overarching plot of the whole TV show itself is a thin plot. There's not a lot of meat to it, if you would.
Yeah.
The majority of it really comes from the backstories. That's why I say they're like vignettes of these backstories of these characters to make you really appreciate them and care about them and love them. And that's why there is no big villain for them to go after. Even Cersei in the first half of the season is she's kind of in the background. Like we see her show up at one point where she's fighting them at Frankenstein's castle, and then she leaves. And then we see the big final battle with her at the castle, and everyone gets shut up. But she's not like always there in the foreground because that's not what's important to the story. The actual if you took all the backstory out of it, it's one episode. Yep. Right? That's all that's left of it. Maybe two. Like maybe the first episode is a save the princess, second episode is a kill the princess. There's not really much meat there to all that.
No.
It's all in that backstory, which yet again I think is good because it gives us different tastes, different characters to go after. And you're right, if one episode misses, I got 7 other ones.
Exactly. And
so
that's always the beauty with television, right? Is that if one episode doesn't hit, big deal. You've got 7 other tries to do it. If you mess up a first act of a movie, then you're going uphill the whole time, and that could ruin your experience. And that's where, like we were talking about before, I said that if there would have been a focus on one or two characters, if this was a movie, I do think it would be the Bride and Frankenstein.
Oh, it'd be their story.
It would be their story, and I think that would do a disservice to GI Robot in particular. I think GI Robot would have been sidelined pretty good if this was a movie, and I think Weasel, we wouldn't like maybe we got some of the backstory for Weasel, but I could see it being cut for time.
Yeah, Weasel would be the Groot of the story.
Yeah.
And then Drax would be the GI Robot. Right? There's a lot of parallels here because and really the backstory is just about Quinn.
Yeah. Was there anything else that you didn't like about this?
It's a good question. Like, but at the end of the day, it's hard to push like I did not like this thing because the series, anything I didn't like or like, it really just be nitpicking at this point. And I'm not a big nitpicker. When it comes to reviewing or discussing film and TV, I kind of look at it saying, what was their intent? What are they trying to go after? And did they hit their mark? Were they trying to go for that? You won't get there perfectly. Like there are little things of like maybe a piece of dialogue was missed that I didn't really like or it was way too cheesy for me. But overall, the biggest thing for me is just I wanted one more surprise. And the surprise I wanted was one of these monsters was truly a monster because we, as a society, at least we like growing up with movies, there have been so many movies where the monster is truly a monster because of humanity.
Yep.
Right. The monster is we made them the monster. And that's what all these stories are. So having 4 of that story, I felt a little bit much. Yeah. That's why I was wondering if one of those stories could be like, especially Nina, if Nina was like the cold-hearted killer that these people are supposed to be, it's like, okay, I understand why Waller put in the group because she is psycho, right? She seems friendly, but she's not. Because Nina, like when you see her backstory and you see how she dies at the end of the story, you're like, that's just sad. Like not sad in the sense of like I'm crying, I'm weeping, but like it's pathetic, for lack of a better phrase, because she was never evil. She was always mistreated, and she was a young, great kid that reminded me of my kids, right? In the sense of like, she's sweet, and she was always sweet, even when she was cast out from society. She was sweet.
Yep.
She loved her life of sitting on a rock and eating raw fish. She liked that life, and then it gets interrupted because a over anxious police officer shot her father.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
which I don't understand. Like like that whole scene, like it made no sense. Like why would you pull a gun on the guy? He wasn't the one you were there to see. Like and so that her storyline is like the one part of this great thing where I really wish they had gone a different direction with it. But so anyway, that's the only thing I can really think of when it comes to this.
So there's only two other things that I want to bring about.
Mm-hmm.
One is the nitpickiest of nitpicky things. And like you, I don't like to nitpick. I'm not a huge fan of so opening credits sequence I really liked. I'm not a huge fan of James Gunn inserting himself in there. It's stupid and it's just me. But
Well, you got to
it
wonder
make
were they told to do it or they do it as an homage to him. And I do like the
yeah,
fact that the last line of every episode is on his screen.
yeah.
That's clever.
I will give it that. There is a small part of me that's a little concerned. Are we getting to M. Night Shyamalan levels of
Ego.
ego? And because James Gunn ostensibly was probably one of the most consistent parts of the MCU. Like between all three Guardians movie and the Guardians Christmas special as well. And all you could tell that there are certain parts that James Gunn did a lot with in a lot of Avengers movies as well. It's like James Gunn doctored some of this up or he wrote some like consulted on some of these sequences and you could tell and they were great. I just hope that now that he has been anointed the savior of DC, that he's not going to get to a point where it's like, well, I got this, everybody, and I don't think that's the case.
I can see that. That's a
I
problem. A lot of directors these days is they get their little sort of. There are no. It's like the old George Lucas problem. If you remember the prequel trilogy, is that no one was around him saying that's not a good idea.
dude, dude, like, can we doctor this script up a little bit? And there's not. It's not like there was a lot in here that was like, hey, James Gunn, maybe you should tone this down a little
Mhm.
bit. Like, is the violence a little over the top at times? Sure, but that's just a James Gunn staple. And I would think that if the studio was like, this is too violent, James Gunn would have been like, fine, okay, I'll turn it down a little bit. The sex. There's two very interesting choices for sex scenes in this. I'm not a prude by any means, but one of them was a choice and one of them kind of made sense for the story. And just it was a bit over the top. And that makes me sound like, hey, get off or like guy yells at cloud, but it is what it is. The only other thing, it concerns Rick Flag Sr. And it kind of makes me wonder, should it have been reversed, where that was Rick Flag Sr. in the Suicide Squad, and we've got a Rick Flag Jr. being part of this group. It would have been an interesting story turn if Rick Flag Sr. was the villain of this. Because from a revenge standpoint, getting revenge on potentially a group that sent his son to die in like an impossible situation, that's a pretty fucking compelling reason to become a villain. But that's not what they did. And I unfortunately I do hate when people do that where they project like, "Oh, I could write this better." It's like,
Yeah,
"Well, if you could write this better, then
you'd be
maybe
writing him.
you should get into Hollywood." But I think for me, the only other thing was that there were some times where, because like Rick Flag was like a big focus of like, or not a big focus, he was a bigger character in the first part of this, and then in the second part, not so much. And I just think that there's just a bit of inconsistency with Rick Flag as a character, and that kind of bums me out a little bit because I think the concept of bringing in grizzled old Rick Flag Sr. into this group to corral them when they saw what happened specifically to his son. Yeah, like you'd want somebody that you trust, but I would have thought that Rick Flag Sr., being this decorated military individual that he is, would take a look at this and be like, fuck off, I'm not doing this.
Well, I think you're right in the fact that he got bodied by by Clayface, which
Mhm.
eventually is why he gets sidelined in the show. He did always feel like he was our POV character. We the audience are connecting with Flag to see this story unfold before us, and when he gets sidelined, I can see why it could be a little bit jarring. Why he are who we've identified this entire thing. I think that's really done so we identify more with the monsters at some point, so
Yeah.
that we have the opportunity to see them in action without their leader or their jailer, effectively. I do think it's an interesting story, though. Like, there are not many stories where the son dies and the father has to do the revenge. Normally, it's the other way around. So it would be interesting to see what Rick, for all we know, Flag might be what you just said. He's working with the next group and he's going to just take down Task Force. We don't know that.
And that to me would be a compelling story that I could get behind because I cannot imagine how rough that would be to be part of a same organization where your son was killed.
Yeah.
Like, and even so, talk about some of the heartfelt moments. Just hearing Rick Flag talk about his son to this princess who's
Mm-hmm.
trying so damn hard to fuck this guy. Like just trying so unbelievably hard. But also, it makes sense given her motivation to try and seduce Flag to get him to be on her side in terms
Yes.
of empathy. So that makes sense. And also just shows, hey, humans are corruptible. Great. They appreciate that. But I would love it if if they gave Rick Flag a little bit more to do, but like you said, and this is why I'm kind of like, I kind of appreciate talking this out with somebody because if you remove Rick Flag from the situation, then you give the monsters, particularly the bride, a chance to show her leadership skills and her ability to lead. And now she's going to be in charge of this task force moving forward. And which again, only true person that could have. So I guess there's that.
I agree. One little thing I thought was interesting. The voice of the princess is the same voice from the dog in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oscar nominated actress from Borat 2, Maria Baklova,
Yes.
was great in this. And I think a lot of credit does need to be given to the voice cast for this as well, because solid group that they've put together. Frank Grillo as Rick Flag Sr., I thought that was a great choice. I'm not a huge fan of some of the comments he said. Is like, I feel like I could really act with DC. I'm like, dude, you've been in DC for like 20 minutes. Like, calm down.
Slow your
But
roll.
yeah, but I think everybody else was fantastic. Like Alan Tudyk is Dr. Phosphorus. Yeah, sign me up for that all day.
He's also the voice of Clayface.
Of course, because Alan Tudyk can do no wrong when it
No.
comes to vocal performances, because he definitely got the track record. Now for DC as well. He's definitely got the track record for Marvel and Disney, so perfect. Or Star Wars and Disney. Any final thoughts
So the
about
new season comes out December of this year. So I am looking forward to that. And that's a good sign. Like, I'm looking forward to the next thing coming out from it. If you have not seen the show and you've listened to the entire spoiler of this, I'd say go check it out because it's an interesting start to the new DCU. And the fact that if it missed, we would never have known it missed. It would have been like, oh, it was just like the Harley Quinn show. It's something else. It doesn't matter. And so it was a great strategy on their part. And I think it's definitely been a good sort of starting spot for the new DCU. But it also is, and John has said many times that every movie will have a different tone to it. So if you look at this and you're like, oh, this is what the new Superman movie is going to be like. No, that's not what it's going to be about. And so it's just an interesting take on it. I enjoy the show. I think people should go watch it. I'm now in my current second watch through of it. And I'm picking up on things I didn't see the first time because I typically watch shows the first time just to watch it and enjoy it and let it wash over me. The second time to pull the pen and paper out and the pad of paper and start taking notes,
drilling down notes. Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So it's not a show for kids, not by a long shot. Even if you took the sex out of it, it is a brutal show. And the reason I think they did animation for it is also because to get that gore level right, it becomes a horror movie.
Yep.
It's not a superhero movie at that point. But if you like things like the Castlevania show or you like any sort of adult animation, you're going to like it. I can't imagine you not liking it unless you really had a vision of what the bride was supposed to be in animation.
I don't like how high her hair was, or I don't like how puffy her pants are. Like, dude, like
the skin's a little too green.
Like, just enjoy it for what it is, because the bride is fat. Like, all of these characters are super fascinating, and I appreciate that if there was any person that could shepherd this particular group into the general audience zeitgeist, it's James Gunn. And for him to do this, to get the result that we got, I think it's a great start. I'm like this actually makes me more hopeful for Superman, believe it or not. And I'm not looking for tone consistency. I'm just looking for characters
Mhm.
and tell me a compelling story. Now, granted, the story for this overall is a bit lacking with the overarching story, but he nails the backstory, and that to me matters a lot more. That
It,
you could find a way to make these characters, you can empathize with somebody who's a quote unquote monster. And I'll take that any day of the week.
it's a testament to how strong it is. The fact that you don't care how weak that the story is,
Mhm.
and it's what 60% of the show is probably all backstory.
Yep, that's that's what it is. So, last thing we'll talk about before we wrap up is we got what's next for DCU's future. We've got Superman coming out later this year, Peacemaker, and then Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, coming out next year. Like anything else on this list that you're excited about that you kind of want to point
Yeah,
out, hey, I'm super excited about this, or anything that you're like, oh, I'm wondering if this is going to come back at some
yeah.
point.
So Supergirl World, and they're the casting phase for that right now, and they just put I was just became Lobo. What's his name? The guy who's Aquaman. I just took a
Jason
blank.
Momoa.
Jason
Jason
Momoa.
Momoa.
He's going to be Lobo in this, which I think he's a better fit for as an actor because Momoa just plays Momoa in all the shows. The thing I think is there's the list in front of us just for our listeners like Lanterns, Waller, Paradise Lies, Booster Gold, Brave and Bold, The Authority, Swamp Thing, Blue Beetle, and Teen Titans. These are all been announced at some level. I tend not to get excited by the ones that there is no hard date. They haven't started casting for it, and there's just maybe a script out there.
It's an idea, like
Yeah,
at that point. That's all it is
I
until
never
you get some type of concrete news for it.
yeah, I never get excited by those things. But that being said, Swamp Thing, I would love to see a good, solid Swamp Thing. I heard the TV show is pretty decent, but I have not seen it. But I would love to see a horror level Swamp Thing because that can be truly terrifying. Because there was a recent run of a Black Label comics that came out for Swamp Thing recently, the past year. It was a three issue run. It was fantastic. Had
Mhm.
Constantine in it. Swamp Thing. It was dark, occultish. That's what I'm looking for. The big green would be very, very interesting. But if you notice off that list, most of the characters on there, except for Superman and the Brave and the Bold, are all characters that are not huge. I mean, the Lanterns, people know Lanterns, but there's three of them,
Mhm.
right? Booster Gold, you may have heard of him, but he's not a big character, right? The Authority is basically another version of the Justice League. But if you notice, there's no Justice League on the list,
Yeah.
right? Though Blue Beetle, I actually enjoyed the Blue Beetle the last time it came out.
I did too, which is where I'm kind of wondering how this is going to be. Like we're rebooting Blue Beetle already. And that's we'll see what happens there. Because if it's a continuation of the character that in the first movie, but like a different take, we'll see. But I could see James Gunn going in a different direction with that as well.
And who knows how far out that is? That could be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. It's just on his radar.
Yeah,
I think half these they were sort of thrown out there to be like, wouldn't that be neat to see a Booster Gold show? That's how
true.
crazy I'm gonna get.
Yeah.
Booster Gold.
So you mentioned it. I'm definitely going to recommend the Swamp Thing show. Like, I think it was canceled unceremoniously way too quick. But that is the current landscape that we have with television nowadays, is that shows do not get enough runway nowadays to tell a compelling story because there's so much out there that finding an audience can be very difficult in your first season. And studios are far less patient and far less risky than they were before. But that Swamp Thing, just when it was starting to get good, they pulled the plug on
I've
it.
heard that. I really need it's on my list.
So definitely check that out. I'm very curious about lanterns. That's probably mine because when you first watch something and you're like, that's not as bad as everyone says that it is. That's kind of how I felt about the Green Lantern, the Ryan Reynolds one. And then I rewatched it again and was like, oh, I get it now. Okay, that's
We
fine.
actually reviewed
So
that movie 6, 7 months ago, and I know I'm to start plugging myself. Like, go listen to that episode. You listen. We have a solid Green Lantern fan on there, wishing that what it was better than it was.
yeah.
But you're right. Going back and rewatching it now, it is hard.
It's not, yeah, it's too bad because I look back at that scene in Wonder Woman with that flashback of all of these heroes fighting, that big climactic fight scene or not climactic, but that flashback fight sequence.
Mhm.
And I see what like the Green Lanterns can do. I was like, that's cool. I want to see more stuff like that. And I'm very excited for who they've assembled for
Mhm.
a cast for Lanterns as well. So I'm gonna be here for all of this. I'm gonna be rooting for all of this. I'm actually very excited for another season of Peacemaker because I think the first season was great. I'm very curious to see how they're going to remove some of the because continuity there is going to be interesting because of what happened in that last episode of Peacemaker with the Justice League coming in. Like, and spoilers for a show that's been out for a while. So if you're pissed about this, sorry, but with the Justice League coming in there, like, can't can't do that anymore. So
Well, I think it's there's a I saw a video on YouTube, and he had a great plan for how resolve that. And
mhm,
basically, that whole last scene, they're all covered in like remember they came out of this place, they're all like got the gas in them, they're hallucinating, and Peacemaker's just telling us this story, and he's making it all up, and everyone else that's part of that group is like, no, that did not happen that way.
that's
Like, and so
hilarious.
basically, make it so he because he tells all these stories, half the stuff he's saying like cannot be true, and make it the ending of that episode be the same exact thing.
I could buy that. That would just be perfect way to do that. All right. Well, Chris, thank you very much for your time today and talking about Creature Commandos. I'm very glad that somebody else out there liked it as much as I did and is willing to talk about it because it's one thing to like it, it's another thing to want to talk to me about it. So I greatly appreciate it. Let us know where the people can find you, and is there anything that you want to plug?
Nope. So, so basically, for me, you can find me in two different places. First off, Movie Smash. We release episodes every other Tuesday. We bring on guests from the comic book world, the movie world, the film industry to take a look at these movies. It's not a serious deep dive in the movies, but basically, it's more like three of us just went to go watch a movie. We're sitting in a diner and we're just wondering what the other person thought when they're going through it, and then we also blame one of them for picking it and putting us through it. The other place is Off Panel Creations. That's basically where I go build nerdy furniture. Go take a look at what we did over there, from comic book cabinets to board game tables and everything in between.
Awesome. So we'll be sure to put links to all of that in our episode description to definitely check them out. Greatly appreciate your time and also looking forward to future collaborations down the road as well.
Definitely.
So that's going to do it for this episode of SPDM TV. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe to anything and everything SPDM Crew, wherever you get your podcast. Join us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, Threads, and Blue Sky at SPDM Crew. Check out our website at SPDM Crew. A shout out to HiFlyer Creative Studios for making our awesome logo. Greatly appreciate their support. And if you have any needs for marketing, brand standards, contact them at HiFlyerCreative.com. Check out our other stuff on the SPDM Crew. We've got podcasts on movies. We've got podcast on music. We've got two new podcasts launching that have launched already. We've got Tolkien on Tap, hosted by TJ Nee. He's talking about J.R.R. Tolkien's work and drinking with some friends. So check that out. And then we also have a new music podcast with a father and son duo going on a musical journey where they just talk about music together. So definitely check all that stuff out. If you've got a podcast idea or you're interested in being part of the crew as a guest or collaborating, email us at gmail.com. Until next time, happy watching, friends.